New look, new beginnings. Welcome to the next chapter where we'll be covering one of the most critical variations in the Manhattan system. The idea is after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight bd7, cd, ed, and bishop f4. This is the starting point of the chapter. Instead of bishop g5, white plays bishop f4, where the bishop is not so greatly placed, but at the same time, it doesn't get affected by h6 g5 so easily. It's still a great square for the bishop, but just not as good as the square on g5. This is what Grandmaster Sam Shankland recommends in his course on 1d4 from white side. He thinks this position is just better for white, but fortunately for us, not only we are objectively fine, but we just get the type of position which we need to fight for an advantage or initiative as black. Our play is very consistent and we'll try to replicate what we have been doing earlier and fight for initiative, play the most ambitious moves, and thus, what do we play? Bishop b4. This is not the main move in the variation, but we are doing exactly same on with our play. We are playing bishop b4 with the idea of knight e4, and then maybe we'll play c5 or queen a5 or play h6 or g5. This is exactly what we used to do in the bishop g5 variations, and I tried to keep it as similar as we could to the previous lines so that it's easier for you to remember the plans. At the same time, the line's perfectly fine, and there have been recent games by very strong players displaying that the variation is absolutely fine for us. In fact, if I remember well, I think Vishwanathan Anand played this against Magnus Carlsen, and he was one of the first players to reveal the new idea here, completely changing the evaluation of the position. All right, so white has few moves here. There's queen c2, there's queen b3, there's a3, and the most critical one, e3. Let's start with queen c2. So it's a possible way. White preempts knight e4 and defends c3. The idea is white wants to play a3, force us to take on c3 so that the queen takes back and white remains with a bishop pair. Of course, we don't want to give up the bishop pair without any strategic defect, and thus we play the most active knight e4. Now, white has a few choices here. One of them is to play knight d2, get rid out of the spin. e3 is possible as well, but it transposes to the main line. And the last one is to play a3, which isn't great, but yeah, it's one of the possible options which we need to cover. Let's start with a3. e3 transposes to the main line, which we have already seen, and this would be the most critical position of this chapter. If white plays a3, as we have seen multiple times in this course already, we take, spoil white's pawn structure. After bc3, we play short castle. There's a possibility to play g5, which I have recommended as an alternative variation in this position, but I think playing short castle is much easier to grasp. The plans are far more easier. All you need to do is after e3, play c5, and then you want to play queen a5 or play knight f6, get the c8 bishop out, finish your development, and put pressure on the pawns on c3 and a3. Black has a slight lead in development, and the knight on e4 is perfectly placed. You also have more space, you have a better pawn structure. The position is just much easier for you to play. Let's go back. White might try knight d2 here to get rid out of the pin, but since it's a passive move, white is making a retreating move without finishing the development. It shouldn't be so great, and we play the natural takes, get the queen into the pin, and then knight f6. Idea? Pretty simple. Oh, just a second. Yeah. Knight f6. We are threatening knight e4, or we just want to castle, get the c8 bishop out to f5, and the position is very comfortable. With the queen being on d2, knight e4 comes with a tempo, attacking the queen as well as the knight on c3. This bishop is fantastically placed, and if we are able to play bishop f5, trade the light square pieces, our position is completely fine without any problems. So this queen c2 move doesn't look so strong. Of course, queen c2, knight e4, e3 is the main line of this chapter, which we would cover via the e3, knight e4, queen c2 move order. And yeah, so technically white can play queen c2, but I think other moves after instead of a3 is not a problem for us. If white plays queen b3, we have already seen that this isn't great. After c5, followed by queen a5 and c4, where we gain space and attack this queen with a tempo, we have a very good position. White's queen on b3 is misplaced and white has to spend a tempo retreating back with it. If white plays a3, again, we know what to do. We take. You now also know what to do. Play c5, prepare queen a5. After e3, get your piece out with a threat, finish your development, attack opponent's weaknesses. With queen a5, you're threatening c3. Now white has two defenses here. One is queen c2, the other one is queen b3. Queen c2 is a bit inferior because the queen is misplaced, and in openings, what you want to do is you want to keep your pieces on the most active square. Not just in openings actually, but pretty much in all parts of the game. With the queen on c2, the queen's not really attacking any point, it's just defending c3, which is great for us because the queen is such a heavyweight piece, and if it's just doing a defensive job, things are very good for us. We just castle, and then we either want to play knight e4, attack the pawn on c3, or play b6, bishop a6, trade off our worst place piece for the white's active bishop, get rid of the bishop pair, and then attack these weaknesses on c4, c3 with knight e4 or rook a8. So white's best move here is to play queen b3 and put pressure on the d5 pawn. This move, okay, it's doing a defensive purpose, but at the same time, it is putting slight pressure on our position as well. Definitely, we are not bothered by it, and what we do is we play knight e4. Now, it's very important to note that we can't play the natural short castle here, which feels very intuitive, but here's where white's idea is being revealed. White wants to play d into c5. The idea that after knight c5, queen b4, we have to retreat. We can't retreat to c7, which is a big problem. And how do we defend the pawn on knight on c5 and the queen on a5? If we trade off the queens, white eliminates the poor pawn structure. Now there is no weakness on c3, and white doesn't have any real weaknesses. While we have an isolated pawn, white has an outpost, and white has the bishop pair. So this is what white's strategic idea is with queen b3. And castle would just play right into white's hands. So what we do? We attack the weaknesses, and we don't allow white to implement their plans. We are the one pushing here. What does white do? Of course, white has to play dc5, otherwise the sequence just doesn't make sense. And now we castle. The difference that we have a lead in development, white obviously can't take on d5, and now we want to play knight dc5. If we play knight e4, dc5 and knight c5, white has the option to trade queens with queen b5, and after that white has a bishop pair. In fact, even queen b4 works as well, and we don't want to give up the bishop pair so easily for white. We want to keep the queens. Why? Because white has a weakness, and white's king is much weaker than our king on e8. It's going to be castled in the next move, while white needs to remove the bishop, and only then white can castle. What do? We castle. White plays queen b4. Of course, white wants to exchange the queens. If white plays something like bishop e2, we are not bothered. In fact, we welcome it. And what do? Get our piece out with a tempo. Knight c5. Queen b4. And do we want to trade the queens? No, really. We come back with queen d8. And now our plan is to either improve our worst place piece with bishop g4 or play rook c8 and play rook c8 and a5, put pressure on the weaknesses on c3, b3. The queen can't come to d4 because of the threat of knight b3. We have a very comfortable position where your next goal is to just get your pieces out, attack opponent's weaknesses, and play a game. Because of white's poor pawn structure and the lack of development, we are on the slightly comfortable end of equality. White might try playing queen b4, and this is the most challenging option. White forces us to retreat with our queen, which wastes some time. It's important to note that queen c5 isn't great because we restrict the potential of the d7 knight, which in turn restricts the c8 bishop. So with queen c5, it's not easy to get this knight out, and then how do we complete our development? That's the problem. So queen d8, now we are threatening knight d into c5. If we get that, we would have a very, very comfortable game. So white's most ambitious attempt is to play bishop d6. Rook e8. We of course get our rook out of the attack from the d6 bishop. And our threat now is b6 or a5. Note that this bishop is vulnerable here due to the knight on e4 attacking it. And the c5 pawn is vulnerable too. So because white's king is undeveloped, we want to connect all these things together and figure out a tactical idea. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, you have to keep an eye on opponent's weak and hanging pieces and try to exploit tactical motives attached to these patterns. So white has two moves here. One is bishop e2 and the other one is rook d1. Rook d1 is possible, but we don't get distracted from our plan and we play a5, push the queen back. The queen can't go back to b2 because now this d6 bishop is only protected by the c5 pawn. How do we exploit that? Pause the video and try to think of a move. Well, if you have unpaused, you can play b6. The idea, you want to play bc5 and then attack the bishop. Things like rook d5 is extremely risky. You get bishop b7 out, then this bishop is putting a lot of pressure, the rook is putting a lot of pressure, the king is in the center, the king can't castle, the bishop is on f1, white has a very significant lack of development, and thus we have a great lead in development and we want to exploit that by getting our pieces out and attacking white's weaknesses. So white wants to play queen d4 here with the idea that b6 runs into queen d5. Of course, we don't allow that, and instead we play knight into d6. After c d6, we defend the d5 pawn and prepare queen into d6, after which the position is comfortable for us. The line can go on for a bit, but I think it's a great moment to stop. Your plan is simple. You want to take the d6 pawn, then you want to get your bishop out and put pressure on the pawns on c3 and a3 by getting the rook out, by maybe getting the other rook into the game and just attacking opponent's weaknesses. Idea is simple, get your pieces out, attack opponent's weaknesses. We have a very comfortable position here. Let's go back. After rook e8, if white plays bishop e2, tries to finish development with castles, what do? We want to make threats, we want to attack opponent's weaknesses. a5. White plays queen d4. Queen b2, as usual, runs into b6. We want to attack c5, we want to attack d6, we want to get the bishop out. We have a very comfortable position. White probably has to retreat with the bishop at some point, after which we'll get a lead in development by getting the knight out to c5 too. I meant the d7 knight, not the one on e4. It's very well placed. We don't want to touch it. Queen d4. And this time though, we don't take on d6 because white hasn't committed rook d1 and rather played bishop e2, which means white can castle very quickly and has ideas of c4. But because white has done that, we have a tactical motive of playing b6. Why? Queen d5. This is the only critical line. And what do we do now? Knight into c5. The difference is when the rook was on d1, this queen was supported and white could have played bishop into c5. White can't do that now. And if white plays queen into a8, winning the rook, we play queen d6, get an exchange back, and exploit that the queen is stuck in the corner. We have ideas of bishop d7, trying to trap the queen, or we want to play knight c3, stopping castling due to the threat of knight into e2. The queen's out of the game. Black's pieces are very well placed. The knight on c5, the knight on e4, the queen on d6, all are very well placed. The queen is on the corner of the board, and white's position isn't easy at all. Maybe white would try to play rook d1. If you play castle, instead of knight into c3, which is possible, the strongest move is the paradoxical rook f8. The idea is not to make a passive move, but to get the rook defended with the king. And now you want to play either bishop b7 or bishop a6 and exploit the skewer. Is it called skewer? No, it's called discovered attack. Yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah, and exploit the discovered attack. Rook a d1, you get your queen out, and again you want to play bishop b7 or bishop a6, as well as you get the tactical motive of knight c3 and knight e2 here, and then playing bishop a6, winning for the material. At the very minimum, we would recover our material losses with knight c3, knight e2. If white isn't accurate, we might even get just a much better position right out of the opening. So if white goes for rook d1, this attacks our queen, forces us to make a passive move, but at the same time, knight into c3 attacks the rook as well, forcing white to spend some time too. What do? We want to get the bishop out, but this is hanging. And how do we make use of that? By playing queen f8. Idea very simple. Knight into c3, knight into e2, bishop e6, get the bishop out, don't allow the king to castle, and then attack the king. White gets the queen out of the ski. I mentioned skewer in the annotations. It should probably be discovered attack. Though I might be wrong. I am not so great with these tactical names of these tactical themes. Maybe someone could help me out. Knight into c3. We attack the rook. We attack the rook. We attack the bishop. Rook d4. Knight into e2. King e2. And bishop e6. And I think this is a good moment to stop. The material is in white's favor. White has an extra exchange. But in return, the rook on h1 is dead for the moment. The king can't castle and it's horribly placed. The pawn on a3 is weak, which we are eyeing through our queen. And if we compare the strategic elements of this position, white has a bit more of material, but black has a much better king, as well as black has more active pieces. So I would say that in terms of strategic, the evaluation of the position, I would say it's very complicated, but I would prefer black. Why? Because we are making threats. Our opponent's king isn't well placed, and white has to defend while we are going to attack. We have discussed this multiple times that making threats, putting pressure on our opponent is much harder for the defending side because they need to be more accurate. While you always have some leverage, the position just feels better for you, and you're putting threats, meaning that your opponent is under a more strain than you, and the game's just comfortable for you. The computer evaluates that this position is better for black, which is definitely a very good sign. And I think, yeah, anyone can play this position without fearing the negative connotations attached with having less material. It's just that king is more important, and because your opponent's king is weak, the extra exchange doesn't matter too much. All right, so that's about it for the sidelines. Let's go back. Let's go back to the main line, and the main line here is e3. White opens up the diagonal for the bishop and then wants to castle. What do? We can play a slow move like c6, but that's not really what we are hoping for, right? We want to be active. We want to make threats. Knight e4. Now white has a few replies here. The main one is queen c2, which transposes to the 7th queen c2 line. There's also rook c1, and there's queen b3. Queen b3, as we know, not a great plan. What do? c5 with the idea queen a5, gaining space with c4, and then putting pressure on c3. I don't think we need to comment more on that because we have seen too many kinds of positions like this. If white plays rook c1, now this is possible, and Kasparov played this against Jan, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, Kasparov played this against Jan. but I don't really like it so much. What do? We play g5. Okay, Kasparov's idea was to prevent the c5 plan somehow because the rook on c1 is putting some pressure on the c5. But we go for this secondary plan, which is, oops, I'm sorry, g5. We force the bishop to e5. If you go back, we play h5. Again, we want to make threats and we are looking to trap the bishop with h4. If white plays queen b3, okay, h3 or h4 is not great because knight g3 comes. You need to spoil your pawn structure. And the queen on c2 would have been better because it's putting on the pressure on f5 square. But with the queen on d1, this is just not a problem for us at all. And if you play something like queen b3, now white wants to take on c3. So we spoil white's pawn structure. Bishop into c3, bc3. h4 doesn't work because of queen d5. So we can be prophylactic for a move and play c6. And now we are ready to play h4. White doesn't have too many resources since bishop e5 runs into f6 and the bishop is getting trapped. If you play something like h3, takes, we spoil white's pawn structure. fg3. Now there are two freshly created weaknesses. We now also have an outpost on e4. How do we exploit that? We start with the subtle queen c7, not queen e7. Queen e7 looks more natural as we are putting pressure on the e3 pawn, which is right into the king's file, and it just feels more intuitive. But white has a good defense with c4, and the queen comes into the play, defending the pawn on e3, and then white is challenging our pieces. We don't want to take on c4 and allow white to get the bishop out to an active square and maybe castle next. So what do we do instead? We start with queen c7, put pressure on g3, force king f2, after which white can't castle, and after knight f6, with the threat of knight e4, we just have a much better position. The king can't castle. We might even defend the pawn on g5 with rook g8. Then we want to play bishop e6 and just castle on the long side. White would probably play bishop d3, controlling the knight e4 jump, but we would still have ideas of that after bishop e6. It's just clear that white's position is, very bad. You can't castle. You have a poor pawn structure. You don't have the center control. Yeah, everything is in black's favor. So let's go back. Maybe bishop e5. And now white wants us to play f6. After this, bishop h3, h5, white has the idea of h4. If you take f into g3, and the concrete problem is both of these squares are weak, and the idea was that in one of the variations, let's say after knight e5, there was rook into h5. With the pawn on f7, it wasn't a brick problem, but with the pawn on f6, rook h5, queen h5 comes with a check. It's a very concrete line, which I don't want to get into. So what do? We just castle. Avoid all that ideas, and then we want to play g4, knight e5, win the bishop pair. And yeah, our position is just very comfortable. You don't have any problems. And once we win the bishop pair, we want to open up the position. We want to finish our development and exploit the king in the center. That's it. Let's go back to the 8th move with queen c2. So white defends the knight with the queen and brings a new piece into the game. This is the main line of the system, and this is what Sam gives in his course on Chessable. But we play g5, which I think Sam underestimated a bit. His idea was to play bishop e5. If white goes for bishop g3, it's possible and has been played a few times, but I don't think this is too critical. We play h5 with the simple idea of h4 and trapping the bishop. Now white has a few choices here. One is h3, bishop d3, and the main line h4. All of them are not threatening, but of course, we should look into it. Let's start with h3. Again, white wants us to play knight g3. The idea is after fg3, white gets bishop d3 and short castle in. White wants to claim a slight lead in development and claim that our pieces are a bit inactive. We can take on g3, but the best way to do that is to start with queen f6. We are defending h8, and now what we want to do is take on g3 and push g4, immediately creating problems in black's position in white's position. We are trying to create problems in white's position without waiting for white to claim a lead in development. Knight g3 has been played in a lot of games. F into g3, queen e7. We are following Tanya Sachdev, Koneru Hampi here. And Hampi won this game, but what Tanya had to do here is to play bishop d3 with the idea of short castle. And black can't take on e3 because of king f1 with the threat of rook e1. The king's in the center, which means white is having a lot of threats. It's very uncomfortable to defend against this. And yeah, black is just losing the queen outrightly after rook e1. And that's why we can't take on e3. And if we can't do that, white would castle, protect the king, get it out of the danger zone, while black's king on e8 is not really safe because of the advanced pawns. So we play queen f6, and only after bishop d3. Okay, so white's threatening short castle. We want to take on g3, but rather than taking on it directly, we start with bishop into c3, forcing white to take with the pawn so that the pawn structure on the queen side is ruined, and only now taking on g3, f into g3. Now white wants to castle, which we don't want to allow, and we play g4. The idea, if the knight moves, white can't castle. So MVL played h into g4 against Grishchuk in their game in this variation. Grishchuk took back. We want to do that same thing too. Now this is opened up. The knight on f3 is under pressure. And Grishchuk played knight h4. So white's claim is that, all right, I have a few weak pawns. I have a few weaknesses. But your bishop is not well. Your knight is not well placed. And yeah, I might have a lead in development. My pieces are a bit better placed. So what are you going to do about it? And Grishchuk played the very cool knight b6, and suddenly all of the problems are solved. So what do we want to do here? We want to play bishop e6, and then we want to castle long and claim that, hey, I have solved my development problems, and now it's you who need to be worried about the static weaknesses. The pawn on g3, the pawn on e3, the pawn on c3, the pawn on a2, c4 square, e4 square, everything's weak. And your kings isn't safe either. Like, I'm controlling the f6, the f file, which means you can't castle, and I'm about to castle long. And yeah, after we develop and finish our development and castle and finish our development, everything's fine. We just want to attack opponent's weaknesses, put pressure on c4, maybe get the rook out and put pressure on the e3 pawn. So h3 isn't great. Let's go back. Yeah, white might try playing h4 as well. Sorry, let's start with bishop d3. h4 is the main line. White might try playing bishop d3, but the white wants to take on e4 and win a pawn, but we play the natural h4, bishop e4. Of course, what else, right? Otherwise, you are losing the bishop. Takes, king f8. So we have a bishop pair now. White wants to preserve it with bishop e5. And we play f6. So this is a critical position. White has an extra pawn, but we have trapped the bishop. However, our king is much weaker. Our pieces aren't well placed. And white wants to claim a lead in development, as well as a better king positioning for the lost material. So what's the most testing way here? Knight into g5. White wants to open up the position, try to exploit the weak king. If white plays something like short castle, we are not bothered. We take on c3. We want to chop off pieces to neutralize white's attack. bc3, fe5, followed by king g7. I think we are able to consolidate very comfortably. And if we are able to safeguard our king, get our pieces out in the game, we are just much better due to the extra material. Of course, white can't allow that. White needs to be energetic and play knight g5. So this time, we need to be a bit careful because white is making threats. But at the same time, we have a piece. So things are not entirely in white's favor. But yeah, you need to display a good deal of accuracy because this time your opponent is making the threats. You're not the one making here. Okay, we start with knight e5. You can also start with bishop c3. That's equally fine too. Knight into e5, d into e5, bishop into c3, bc3, and f into g5. I think let's talk about the strategic features of the position here before going deeper into the variations. So, white has 2 pawns for a piece. So, we have a great material advantage, but, and a very important but, that our king is very poorly placed. At the same time, white has a passed pawn on e5 which is looking dangerous. Okay, white has a spoiled pawn structure, but white has a passed pawn too. White has more space, and the king is just significantly much better. White wants to play f4, open up the f file so that this king feels much more in danger. The rook might join in the attack too from the f file, which is a negative thing for us. And what else? So strategically speaking, we have more material, but white has more space, more active pieces, and a much safer king. The position is balanced, and it's about whether the dynamic factors prevail or the static factor prevails. So what are the dynamic factors? Initiative. How can white try to fight for an advantage here? By using initiative, by attacking the king, by making sure that all the pieces join the party, try to attack our king. And what is the plan for us? Simple. We just want to get our pieces out, safeguard our king. If we are able to do that, we'll consolidate our material advantage and we would go on to win. So the position is all about static versus dynamic. White wants to display energy. We want to display energy too, but in a different sense that we want to get our pieces out and consolidate. White wants to push the boundaries, break the barriers, get the pieces in and try to attack. Okay, now we know about the static features, and there are two critical ways in this position for white. One is to play short castle and try to play f4 on the next move, or the other one is to just start with f4. Both of them look dangerous. Let's start with the more concrete f4 because white says that, hey, I don't want to spend time on short castle. I just want to get the attack started, play f4. We play king g7. Our idea is simple. We want to chicken out, get the king to the corner of the board and hide it there. White plays f5. Now this pawn looks very intimidating. White wants to get f6 in, then maybe castle and then get e6 in. And these two pawns look like monsters on the sixth file of the board. Now we can try to defend against it, but we just don't want to guard, right? We want to hit. How do we do that? Bishop into f5. A great move, exploiting that white's king is in the center. And after queen f5, we play rook f8. And the point is that the f file is now covered, which means white can't castle. White has many weaknesses, right? The e3 pawn is weak, the e5 pawn is weak, the c3 pawn is weak. The king can't castle on the queen side too, because there are no pawns guarding the king in front of it, which means that if we are able to land checks with queen e7, queen a3, for example, this rook might join in from f2, and white's king is not really feeling safe. White needs to play queen e4, guarding the d3 square as well as the d5 square, and we can simply play queen e7. Idea? Simple. If you castle long, I want to play queen a3 check. I get a piece in, so I'm trying to finish my development. And my idea is to play rook a d8 on the next move and then get the last piece into the game, after which I'll start making threats. I think the position is balanced from an objective point of view, but from a practical point of view, again, black is making threats, so I would prefer black. Our mindset is simple. We just want to make threats. So let's go back. White might play castle and say that, okay, I finished my castling and now I want to break open the position. Okay, king g7. As usual, I want to hide behind the pawns, f4. White wants to play f5, get e6 and f6 in. But this is a move slow. This gives us time to develop our pieces. How do we do that? We get a new piece into the game. preferably a very important minor piece, because we start by developing our minor pieces and then the major pieces. So bishop d7. Queen e5 was played by one of the players in this game, but the problem is that after f5, f6 comes with a tempo. Sorry. And you need to move the queen again. So rather than doing that, just play bishop d7. Idea, we want to play bishop c6, after which the bishop is very well placed on that diagonal. The queen might join in from d5 or d2, put pressure on the e3 pawn and the g2 pawn, and black is about to finish the development. White needs to play f5, bishop c6, and if white allows us to play queen d5, the position's just great. So queen g4. The idea is, okay, you can't bring your queen in because the pawn on g5 is hanging. So what do we do against this? King h6. Just get the king out of the corner. And I think this is a good moment to stop. White can't really attack the king now. So white wants to push the pawns, but the pawns are weak now. Black has finished the development of the minor piece. And in the next move, the queen's coming out, after which the rook comes out. White doesn't have any minor pieces to attack the king. So if there would have been a knight or a bishop present on the board, I would be scared, but there are just no minor pieces. The f5 pawn restricts the potential of white's f1 rook. So there's nothing to be afraid of really. And all you need to do is just get your pieces out, either with queen e7 or queen d3, and then get the rooks in and exchange of the pieces. The more the pieces get exchanged, the better it is for black, because any endgame here is just completely winning. All you need to make sure is that white isn't pushing the pawns too further, yeah? And yeah, computer prefers black too, which is great. And yes, I think that's it for this position. Let's go back. So h4. Now we take f into g3, and the difference between the line with h3 and h4, sorry. Yeah, I'm so bad with arrows. Yeah, h3 and h4 is that we can now take on h4. This is the great point. The pawn is not really weak here. And after gh4, now we play queen e7. If white plays bishop d3, the pawn on g5 is not really hanging anymore, which means we can play knight f6, unlike the variation in with h3, where white would now have the option of playing knight g5 in certain positions after, let's say, white castles. The second point is we also have the option of knight g4 here, which we wouldn't have in the line with h3, and the pawn on e3 is hanging and under a huge deal of pressure due to the knight and the queen attacking the pawn. Let's say white castles. Okay, we can't start with knight g4 because of the threat of knight d5. We finish off the development with bishop e6, get our last minor piece in, and then we have a threat of knight g4 or playing rook g8, putting pressure on g2, or maybe playing castle, get the king out of the danger zone and start attacking white's weaknesses. I already think that this position is much easier to handle as black, since you know your plans, you know what the threats are, you know where the weaknesses are. And keep in mind that you also have the pair of bishops. White has a bad pawn structure. Alright, let's go back. So bishop e5, the most played line, and this is what Sam Shankland recommends. So rather than playing f6 here, we play knight e5. This is the first small surprise. After knight into e5, I think Shankland kind of underestimated this move. c6. d5 isn't great. You spoil your pawn structure for nothing. And after queen e7, with the threat of g4 and queen e5, black is better. Knight into e5, c6. Now, what's the idea? The idea is that I have a pair of bishop, which means I want to consolidate in the position. The knight is very well placed on e4. So if I am able to finish my development easily without any problems, I should be better. White's idea, bishop d3, that hey, you have your pieces a bit overextended. The pawn structure is a bit bad, and I'm going to exploit that. Okay, white can't play a slow move like bishop e2, because this allows us to get our worst place piece in, the c8 bishop, with bishop f5. And the idea is, okay, in QGD structures, we want to trade off this bishop. It's not well placed. And if we are able to get rid out of this bishop, our position is very well. White now needs to play bishop d3 with the idea of f3. We play f6, force the knight back, and after bishop g6 with the idea of queen e7 and long castle, the knight is a monster on e4. The bishop is exerting a lot of pressure. The queen might even come from a5, put additional pressure on c3 or queen e7, defend the knight on e4. And once we get long castle in, we would have a great position because of the pair of bishops and the activity of the pieces. So white needs to play bd3, after which we play f6, forcing the knight back. You can't take here because after f e5, the threat is d into e4, and bishop into h7 loses a piece due to e4, and the bishop is trapped. If you play bishop g6, I would play king f8, then get the queen out and win the bishop. The bishop doesn't have any piece defending it, and the rook and the queen cover all the squares which the bishop can go to. The knight needs to come back. And now we play queen e7. This is a slightly unorthodox move. I think this is what people have been underestimating. The idea is very straightforward. I want to increase the control of the knight on e4. Very simple. The problem which I feel, which I think white players kind of believed in, was that our pieces are a bit undeveloped, and maybe white can try to exploit that. But if you go through the chapter lines, I think you would see that we are able to hold everything concretely, and we have a static advantage of the bishop pair. So if we are able to consolidate, we remain better. I think this particular point is underestimated by a lot of players, and that's why they didn't go for these lines. I'm sure that if one or two top players start playing this regularly, this line would come right back into the fashion. So white has several ideas here, but the critical ones seem to be short castle and a3. Let's look at them one by one. Short castle. This was played in the only Grandmaster game in this variation. Black was Aryan Tari from Norway, one of the leading opening experts of this generation. And Tari in his game played bishop f5, which is possible, but I prefer playing f5, just controlling the center, gaining more space, and trying to intimidate our opponent with these massive pawns. Bishop f5 is possible too, but I think f5 is stronger in the sense that it carries more practical value because we are putting more pressure, right? With bishop f5, you are defending the pawn, which is all right. It's a very possible way to play the position. But with f5, you are not only defending, but you are also threatening to play g4 at some point, probably after bringing the bishop back into the game, hinting towards the white king, and then playing g4, maybe even bishop e6, castling long, and trying to open up the position with h5, h4, then blast open the position with g3, and so on. The only move which keeps whites in the game is knight e5. If you play a slow move like a3, which is precisely what we want, this time we don't spoil the pawn structure, but rather play bishop d6, getting the bishop back into the game, and then preparing g4 with the idea of queen h4, putting pressure on this weak pawn on h2, and then maybe even playing bishop e6, castling long. Black is better because of more space, pair of bishops, and more active pieces as well. Just look at the knight on e4. It can't be touched. We are also threatening g4, pushing back the white knight and then making the h2 pawn vulnerable. So knight e5. What white wants to do is either play f4 or play f3. We play bishop d6. We just get our bishop back, put pressure on e5 and ask white to commit and make a decision with the pawn on f2. Now white has two ways. One is to play f4 The other one is to play f3. f3 is possible and it's very interesting in the sense that white is ready to give up a pawn to dislodge our active knight from e4. We happily take up the offer and take on c3. B takes, queen takes isn't a problem. Bishop e5, d5, queen into e5. And it feels like we have won a pawn. What was white's point? f4. White wants to open up the position and exploit that our king is still in the center. If we play gf4, white wants to take back with the pawn and give a check, then put the rook on the outpost on e5, put pressure on f5, maybe even instead of rook fe1, white might try rook ae1 and then put the rook on e5. All of white's pieces, the bishop on d3, the rook, the queen, they are very well placed, while we are struggling with the king, with the bishop, with the rook. So we can't obviously take on f4, but we accept the hanging pawn and take on e3 with a check. White is forced to play king h1, and now white wants to play rook e1 and win the queen. So what do? The pawn on g5 is vulnerable, the pawn on f5 is vulnerable. Rather than being too greedy, we should just simply finish our development and castle. We get out of the pin. White brings the rook into the game. All right, we come back. Queen c5. With queen c5, specifically, we keep the e7 square protected so that white can't just jump into the position with rook e7, where it would really pressurize our king. So queen b6 isn't great because of rook e7. Queen c5, we keep the e7 square controlled. White plays f into g5, asking us to deal with the pawn on f5 and opening up the file for the rook, while recapturing a pawn at the same time. Now, again, we don't want to be too greedy. The motto is simple, just get all of your pieces out. Bishop d7. The idea, very straightforward, rook e8, just get all of our pieces out. Once our pieces are into the game, we have no problems. White has double pawns, not a problem for us. And if white takes on f5, we take, and get the rook out with a very comfortable position. White has some things in his favor, but at the same time, the king is weak. We have more space. We have better pawn structure. All right, our king is slightly weak, but there are no real minor pieces to attack our king. If there was a knight, okay, I would have been really scared. But without any minor pieces, I don't think there's a big problem in our position. If you play something like this, I might even get the queen back to e7, then threaten to play rook f5. I have back rank ideas, and if white takes back with the queen, let's say queen f5, I might even consider rook f8 going into the endgame because white has pair of doubled pawns, while I have a better pawn structure. And this 4 versus 2 majority is stronger on the queen side than this 3 versus pawn 1 majority on the king side. So let's go back. And instead of f3, white can try playing f4. White also says that, hey, I maintain my knight on e5. What are you going to do about it? Just play bishop e6. We finish our development. And what we want to do is play long castle, king b8, get the king out to safety, then probably play rook g8 and put pressure on this pawn on g2. From a strategic perspective, we have pair of bishops. I'm sorry, we don't have more space. Both the sides have equal space. But we have pair of bishops and we have a target to attack to. White's target isn't so obvious. Like pushing b4, b5 isn't easy. While playing rook g8 and gf4 is just very obvious, and we are going to achieve it no matter what white does. The computer says the position's right about balanced, but yeah, I would prefer playing black here. Okay, let's go back. So after knight f3, queen e7, a3 is also a good and a critical move, which computer initially prefers, but we don't mind it. As we know already, spoiling white's pawn structure with bishop into c3 is an integral part of our plan. And let's say out of 100, maybe in 90 cases, we just do this. B into c3. And if you observe, with a3, there's now an outpost since the pawn structure is spoiled. The pawn on a3 is weak. Now, how do we exploit that? White probably wants to take on e4 and play knight d2 or play knight d2 directly, opening up the diagonal for the bishop and creating a weakness on the e4 square. And here comes a strong novelty, knight d6. The idea, very simple. I want to keep in control of the c4 square, which is very weak at the moment. And then I want to play bishop e6, long castle. Once I have my king safely placed, I want to start rolling on the king side with h5, h4, g4, h3, g3, just open up the position. And it sounds like, okay, it's a very elaborate plan, but if we look into it, I don't think it's very hard to achieve. Our pieces are very well placed. The knight on d6 is perfectly placed in this Carlsberg pawn structure. We also have an outpost on c4 right now. And yeah, for white to attack on the queen side, it's not easy. The b7 pawn is usually weak in these positions, but with the knight on d6, everything is under control. And one small part which I want to add is, if we are able to trade these bishops, our position's fantastic. We would then have a very strong square on e4 as well as on c4. So white has a couple of ideas here. One is knight d2. White wants to control these squares. Other is short castle. Okay, and there's also h4, which isn't great, but we need to look into it. Let's start with short castle. White tries to finish the development. What do? Simple. Bishop e6. Before you try to push pawns on the king side with h5, it's very wise to just play bishop e6, finish your development, and then try to push pawns and open up the position. If you open up the position with your king in the center, white would really benefit from it. And with h5, white can concretely play bishop g6 check and force us to make a concession with our king. Even if that's not the case, you always have to be aware of e4 or c4 breaks, maybe with rook fe1 included, and then your king is coming under some pressure. So just play bishop e6, get your king to safety, and then open up the position. Rook fb1, probably the only logical move which I can think of in this position. It's already a novelty, so knight d6 was a novelty in itself. So I couldn't think of any other logical move, but yeah, I would really advise you to explore the position, try to come up with plans from both the sides, and just try to navigate this mess. It's a complicated position with not so many games, so yeah, you can try to explore this on your own. So if you play rook fb1, now we can play h5. The point is bishop g6 check runs into bishop f7, and we are very happy to trade the bishops since now the c4 and e4 squares are very weak. And if white tries to play rook fe1 and play e4, white has to spend additional time, which we don't mind, and we can quietly play long castle, get our king to safety. So instead of short castle, white might try h4, which is very ambitious. The idea, if you take on h4, white gets the rook into the game. Now all of the pieces are into the game except for the rook on a1, but black's rook on a8, bishop on c8, rook on a8, rook on h8, all are out of the game. If you play g4, this creates an unnecessary weakness on the f4 square. White might try playing knight g1 with the idea of knight g2 and occupying the outpost with knight f4. So what do? Develop our pieces, make threats, bishop g4. We get our last piece out, and if white tries to win a pawn with h into g5, we firstly spoil white's pawn structure, bishop f3. So now we have eliminated one of our worst placed piece, gf3. White has a pair of double pawns. We take back. The most promising continuation seems to be rook h7 for white. Takes, and white seems to be a pawn up. But after long castle, white's miseries are now quite visible. Firstly, the king is in grave trouble. You can't castle long because of the threat of knight c4, and the pawn on a3 is under huge pressure. The pawn on f3 is weak. Secondly, this rook on d8 is coming into the game with rook h8. The h file is open. My queen from e7 can be moved to f6, where it exerts pressure on f3, and this knight is coming to c4. So black's pieces are flowing here. You know what the good squares for your pieces are. And with white, as usual, white doesn't know what to do with the pieces. White has to defend. Black is making threats. We already know that these kind of positions are what we are aiming for. So let's go back. Knight d2. White controls the e4 square and the c4 square and might even try to exchange off the weakness with c4. We play bishop e6, develop our piece, and are ready to play long castle on the next move. White has now many plans. One is knight b3 with the idea of placing the knight on c5 where it's very well placed. There's also c4 trying to eliminate the weakness in one go. And the main move, short castle. Of course, these main moves, sidelines are not really played out in a game. So it's based on what I feel is more natural. Don't take too much stress on what should be in your file, what shouldn't be in your file. Just try to absorb the ideas because this is a not relatively, but a completely new position. It's best to just try to understand different kind of positions and make mind maps in try to note down the typical plans, have some concrete structures in mind, and have some plans for both the sides. You know what you're looking for, right? Such things would really benefit in the sense that even if you don't have a track of all the variations, you would still be able to figure out your way in your game. So let's start with knight b3. White wants to play knight c5, improve the position of the knight, and put pressure on the bishop on e6. Again, we can play long castle, but because we are very happy to trade the bishops, I propose playing h5. As usual, bishop g6 is met with bishop f7, and we are happy to trade the bishops because of these weak squares on e4 and c4. Knight c5, white improves the position of the knight. We continue to gain space with h4. Now what we want to do is play h3, provoke g3. Gh3 is bad because then our rook comes into the play and the pawn on h2 is seriously weak with the rook being very active. And if you play g3, then this f3 square would be weak. And I can imagine the bishop coming over here. Or in the best case scenario, let's say b6, knight e6, we are able to trade the bishops. Then our queen might try to poke in to f3 via g4 and give some mating threats. The pawn on g3 is very annoying for the white king since it's always in front of you, right? King doesn't want an attacker near them. And with the pawn on h3, it's always going to be uncomfortable. You would have back rank ideas. You would have checkmating ideas. This concept has been really into fashion after the Alpha Zero games. And if white plays h3 here, then black has the option of playing g4 at the right time and attacking these weaknesses. This is what is known as a hook. A hook is basically a pawn on G on H file, which can be attacked by any other pawn. So, short castle. And what do we do? Provoke weaknesses. H3. White needs to play G3 because playing GH3, rook H3 would be suicidal. You don't want to open up the rook in front of your king, especially. G3. And now, instead of playing long castle first, I want to play b6, force knight e6, and queen e6. What we have done is, we have eliminated this very good knight on c5 for our inactive bishop on c6, and now the knight on d6 is an absolute monster. The queen on e6 is very well placed too, and our king has nothing to fear. It's very good on the square d7, while white has plenty of weaknesses in the position. f3 is weak, e4 is weak, c4 is weak, and our plan is very simple. We might try to put pressure on the king on the queen with queen g4, queen f3, or maybe play king d7, f5, f4, try to open up the king side while keeping the center closed to keep our king protected. Black is slightly better here, and it's just not my evaluation. The computer agrees with it as well. Let's go back. So knight e6, instead of knight b3, white can try playing c4 to exchange everything and eliminate the weakness, but we don't mind it. We are happy to trade everything on c4 and then play long castle, followed by h5, h4, and rook h8. You could have taken on c4 theoretically, but I'm maintaining the pressure for some time because what I want to do is provoke bishop e6, which helps me to play queen e6 and get my queen improved. With bishop into c4, white's queens gets improved. I don't want to do that. I want to say that, hey, you take on e6, put my queen on a better square, and the trade has benefited me slightly. Now h5, h4, h3 is more convincing because I have these ideas. Let's go back. Short castle. Now white finishes development, and yeah, we can still play h5, but long castle. Okay, let's get our king to the safety since our opponent has done the same. Now again, from white's perspective, I think the only critical move is a4. White wants to play a5, a6 and start poking around in our position. If you play something like rook a b1, I just play king b8, maybe put the king on a8. The b7 pawn is under no pressure because of the knight on d6, and the idea is simple. h5, h4, h3. That's it. a4, white wants to gain space on the queen side. We want to gain space on the king side. White continues to gain space. We continue to gain space. And now there are two critical position options again. One is rook a b1, rook a b1, and the other is to immediately play a6. And the point is, white forces us to play b6. In usual situations, this is a concession for us. But in this particular position, we don't mind it because the pawn on c6 is not really weak. The only way white can try to exploit it is by playing c4 and trying to open up the c file. But after dc, knight into c4, we might start with bishop into c4 as well. Takes, queen c4 and rook d6. And the point is, white doesn't have any other minor piece to attack the pawn on c6. Had there been a light square bishop or a knight, I would have been a bit worried. But without these, okay, no problem. I can easily defend the c6 pawn with either my king or my h8 rook or maybe my queen with queen e4, queen d7. And now I have everything defended on the queen side. I'm ready to start attacking the king side with h3. White needs to be worried about h3, g3, queen e4. And I am putting a lot of pressure. This rook is hinting here, so you can't take on it. And white's rooks are not really well placed. My queen is in the center, while white's queen is slightly away from the center. In endgames, especially in the queen ones, the side which controls the center is usually dominating here, and black is controlling the center here. I think black is on the better side of equality here, but from an objective point of view, the position's equal. Let's go back. Rook a b1, trying to put pressure on the b7 square. As usual, we just play king b8. What we want to do? Get the king to safety on a8. White tries to improve the position of the knight. Okay, let's get the king out of the danger zone. Knight c5, and now, since our king is safe, we start attacking h3. Firstly, I want to poke a hole in your position. g3. Now these light squares are much weaker. And as we have already discussed, we are very happy to trade this set of pieces. And we play bishop g8. Idea? Very simple. Bishop h7. We trade off the light square piece and then penetrate on the c4 square. We might defend the b7 pawn with rook b8. At the moment, the knight on d6 is doing a fantastic job. And I don't know, I have ideas of queen e4 at some point. White needs to keep and hold of the square with the knight on c5. But the knight on c5, if you don't move it, there's not really many threats. In fact, I might even try playing bishop h7, taking on d3, and then playing queen h7. The queen hints here. It keeps an eye on this square. And yeah, after rook b8, knight c4, maybe I even get queen f5 in. It sort of starts getting uncomfortable for white. The position is complicated, of course, because, okay, let's be fair. There is some pressure on the b7 pawn. But this is precisely the kind of positions we are looking to fight for a win, where the better player wins, right? You are black. You can't win out of the opening directly. You need to fight for your win. But this position gives you the chances you need to fight for a win. You know the plans. Just go out there and crush your opponents. All right, guys. So this was about it for chapter 7. Let's just summarize it. Let's go back. So the chapter starts with knight bd7, cd, bishop f4, which Sam Shankland recommends. So a lot of players might try it. Bishop b4, e3, e3, knight e4. We want to put pressure right out of the opening. Queen c2, g5, putting pressure, making threats. Bishop e5, bishop g3, h5. We know that this is fine for us. Just have a look at the lines once again. Bishop e5. Now the very important knight into e5 and not f6. Knight e5, knight e5. c6, controlling the possibility of queen a4 check. Bishop d3, f6, pushing the knight back. Knight f3, queen e7. a3, takes, knight d6 with the idea bishop e6, long castle, h5, h4, controlling the c4 square. Maybe bishop g8, bishop h7 in the end, trying to eliminate the d3 bishop. If white goes castle, we go f5 with the idea of getting the bishop back with bishop d6 and then playing bishop e6 and long castle. Alright, see you in the next chapter.